A young woman heads out to see a concert with friends. She never makes it home. 2 days later, a parking garage attendant follows a smell he can't explain and finds the reason her family never heard back. I'm Zokora 8. 25-year-old Mitchell Dung was the kind of friend who always texted
Hi guys. So I'm going to attempt to vlog today.
back. So when she stopped responding after a night out, the people who loved her knew something was wrong almost immediately. On the evening of August 26th, Mitchell told her family she was heading to a venue called Alley Cat Atlanta to meet up with friends.
On the ground. On the ground now, mother. Get on the ground.
I really did. I need to go in. I needed this because I am a horrible person.
For a concert. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. Music, people, maybe a late dinner after. Nothing about the plan suggested danger.
Boy, she went out for a minute.
As soon as I got here, I smelled a strong stench as soon as I got by the elevator. And you just go in here and clean up like that. But you know how you think it's a dead rat or something like that? I kept walking. I don't see that side. So I said, just walk a little farther. When I walked a little farther, I said, oh.
Okay, the hair was covered up, right?
I don't know that, but I found it right there. I
Look
don't
like a female or a male to you.
To me, it looked kind of like a female.
Possible, because she's small.
Nah, he just want to know what's going on. I don't know myself, so I just told.
It's a dead body there up on the stairwell. So
And I talked to their security. They walked the stairwells last night. Said they didn't see anything.
nah, it's a smell coming from there. So even if they didn't see nothing, they would have.
Well, we have people through the garage all night because of masquerade.
I'm saying though, this person that's dead been dead for a while. So they walked the stairwell, they would have seen her up under the stairwell. So she didn't just die last night.
But somewhere between the venue and home, Mitchell Dung simply vanished. When her family couldn't reach her, they didn't wait. They called Atlanta police. For days, there was nothing. No word, no trace, no explanation. And then, on the morning of August 30th, in a parking garage on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, an attendant doing his rounds noticed something he couldn't ignore. A smell. The kind that, once you've encountered it, you never mistake for anything else. He told investigators he almost walked past it, told himself it might be nothing. An animal, spoiled food, anything but what his instincts were telling him. But the smell got stronger near the stairwell. And when he finally looked, he found a body tucked beneath the stairs, covered with newspaper as if someone had tried, badly, to hide it. Atlanta PD arrived within minutes. What they found matched no missing pet, no accident, no explanation that made sense on its own. A woman, unclothed, partially concealed, clearly deceased for some time, and just as clearly, not there by accident. Building security later told police they'd walked those very stairwells the night before and seen nothing unusual. That detail troubled investigators. If the body had already been there, hidden in that stairwell, security should have found it. Instead, it took a smell, and one attendant's refusal to look away, to bring Mitchell Dung home to the people searching for her, in the worst way imaginable. Investigators worked quickly to confirm what many already feared. The woman in the stairwell was Mitchell Dung. She had been missing for 4 days. Now her family had answers to one question, and none to the ones that mattered most. Who did this? And why? The medical examiner's office could not immediately determine an official cause of death. That kind of certainty would take weeks, sometimes months of toxicology and forensic work. But investigators on scene didn't need a lab report to know they were looking at a homicide. The condition of the body, the location, the attempt to conceal her, all of it pointed to the same conclusion: foul play. Detectives began combing through everything they could find.
I got you. I'm with you.
First or second?
Real. On the ground. On the ground now, mother. Get on the ground. On the ground. Hands behind your back. Hands behind your back. You understand me? Put a taser. Do something on the taser. You understand?
Surveillance footage from the garage, footage from the streets nearby, footage from a MARTA station not far from where Mitchell had last been seen alive. Somewhere in that footage, investigators believed, was the last version of Mitchell Dung anyone would ever see moving under her own power, and possibly the person responsible for making sure she never went home again. It would take detectives the better part of a month, sorting through hours of grainy security video and cross-referencing timelines, before that footage led them somewhere. Not to a stranger who vanished into the night, to a name, a face recognized almost instantly by someone who knew him. A family member who saw the surveillance clip and didn't hesitate. By September 22nd, Atlanta homicide detectives had a suspect, and they were about to go get him. To understand how they got there, it helps to understand who Mitchell Dung was before any of this happened. Friends described her as social, dependable, the kind of person who made plans and kept them. That's part of why her silence registered as wrong so quickly. In an era when people can vanish from a group chat for a day without anyone thinking twice, Mitchell's family knew almost immediately that this wasn't that. She had told them where she was going. She had told them who she'd be with. And then, nothing. Atlanta is a city that never fully stops moving, even after midnight. Ride shares circling downtown, security cameras mounted on nearly every commercial building, transit stations running late into the night. That density of technology would end up working against whoever was responsible for what happened to Mitchell. But it would take time and patience to turn thousands of hours of footage into a single damning timeline. In the meantime, the discovery of her body sent a different kind of shockwave through the neighborhood around that parking garage. Employees who worked nearby described a strange, unsettling few days before the body was found. Talk of a smell, dismissed by more than one person as nothing worth investigating further. It's a detail that recurs in cases like this one, again and again. The small warning signs that in hindsight seem impossible to miss, and at the time seem impossible to justify acting on. Nobody wants to be the person who calls the police over a bad smell in a stairwell, until occasionally they're the person who has to. When Atlanta PD's homicide unit took over the investigation, they treated the scene with the seriousness the discovery demanded. A full forensic sweep, a request for every scrap of nearby surveillance footage.
Yeah.
Right before Jacavius is put into the squad car, he begs for officers to at least let him talk to his girlfriend.
What's it?
That's to my girlfriend. My girlfriend.
Okay.
She works in that.
Where's her car?
Where's her car? She in the back.
Okay. Is it black?
No.
Okay.
Here she goes. She's coming out right now.
Yeah, we were just going to secure him in there just temporarily.
Thank you, sir, for listening for me.
That's good. Perfect.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you.
Good job, Steve. Really good job. Great job. Seriously. Yeah, guys, really. Yeah, no, we really appreciated this.
That's his girlfriend right there?
Yeah. We'll go ahead, Sergeant. We'll secure him over here.
Transport?
Yeah, that's our transport. Come on, buddy.
Did I just say one thing? What do you want? Just one thing. Just one thing, sir.
Can you take that? Can you follow him down? I'm gonna do some stuff up here.
Yeah.
Do you have a locker in here?
Yes, I do.
Where's your locker at?
It's K's number. I think it's down below. It's right by the break room.
Okay. Just give us a second. We'll talk to you, okay?
Can I say one thing to my girlfriend?
What's that?
Can I say one thing to my girlfriend?
Give me a second.
I know what I'm going. I know what I'm going.
Get in there.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm apologizing to everyone.
And an urgent push to identify the victim and notify her family, which came quickly given how recently she'd been reported missing. From there, the case became a puzzle assembled one grainy frame at a time. Investigators needed to establish two things: where Mitchell had been in her final hours and who she had been with. Both answers were sitting somewhere in a digital archive scattered across dozens of different cameras owned by dozens of different businesses and transit authorities. None of it centralized, all of it needing to be requested, reviewed, and cross-referenced by hand. It's unglamorous work. There's no dramatic breakthrough moment in most of it, just detectives sitting with a timeline, watching Mitchell Deng move through a city that had no idea it was watching the final hours of her life. Until frame by frame, another figure enters that timeline alongside her. A figure who doesn't leave. Meanwhile, detectives kept working the footage. Every camera told a fragment of the story. A rideshare company's dash-mounted camera might catch a passing figure for 2 or 3 seconds. A business's exterior camera might catch someone crossing a parking lot at 2 a.m. Features indistinct, gait unmistakable if you know what you're looking for. Individually, none of it proves anything. Stitched together, hour by hour, it becomes something close to irrefutable. That's the unglamorous truth about how most homicide cases like this one actually get solved. It isn't a single smoking gun piece of evidence. It's the slow accumulation of dozens of small, ordinary pieces of footage that nobody thought mattered when the cameras first recorded them, until a detective sits down weeks later and realizes that together they tell you exactly where someone was and who they were with for every minute that mattered. The trail that led Atlanta police to their suspect started with a stumble. Reviewing surveillance footage frame by frame, detectives spotted Mitchell Deng near a MARTA transit station, walking unsteadily into the street. It was a small, almost throwaway moment, but investigators would later call it the single most important few seconds of video in the entire case. Because in the footage, a man approaches her. And from that point on, the two of them move through the city together, camera to camera, until they disappear into the parking garage where her body would later be found. Detectives tracked that man through the footage until they had enough to identify him, 24-year-old Jacavius Arnold. On September 22nd, they moved in and arrested him at his workplace, a DeKalb County Animal Services facility. Body camera footage from the arrest shows a man who seemed to already know exactly why officers had come for him, apologizing before he was even told the charges, telling the arresting officers he needed to go down for a long time. In the hours that followed, Arnold gave investigators a detailed account of that night, one that homicide detective Jerian Shepard would later lay out piece by piece in a Fulton County courtroom. According to that account, Arnold said he first noticed Mitchell near the transit station and approached her, offering help. She initially told him to get away, but he persisted, and she eventually accepted his help finding her car. In doing so, he ended up with her phone and her keys, walking alongside her under the guise of being a good Samaritan. Detective Shepard was blunt about that framing in his own testimony. Whatever Arnold called himself in that moment, good citizen wasn't the word the detective would use. What Arnold described next was the turning point. In the stairwell of that parking garage, he said, Mitchell began to resist him, and he responded with violence, restraining her and ultimately taking her life. According to the detective's testimony, Arnold went on to describe assaulting her body after her death, then attempting to destroy evidence, stripping her clothing because, in his own words, he watches how they investigate cases on TV, discarding her phone and hiding her body beneath the stairwell before leaving the scene. He reportedly returned once more, not out of remorse, but because he'd left behind a pair of sunglasses near the body. It was, by any measure, one of the most disturbing confessions Atlanta homicide detectives had heard in years. And it got worse. Detective Shepard testified that Arnold admitted, unprompted, to 2 prior attacks on women in DeKalb County. Assaults investigators had not previously connected to him. In both cases, Shepard said, the pattern was strikingly similar. A vulnerable woman, alone, late at night. An approach disguised as help, an assault that followed. In one of those earlier attacks, the victim survived. She managed to fight back with pepper spray and escape. Neither of those 2 women had been identified at the time of the hearing, though DeKalb County investigators had already been notified and were following up. Prosecutors argued that everything Arnold described lined up with details investigators had never released publicly, including specifics about how Mitchell's body had been concealed. That, Detective Shepard testified, was what investigators call guilty knowledge. Information a suspect could only have if he had actually been there. There was other evidence too. A family member, Arnold's own grandmother, was shown a portion of the surveillance footage and identified him almost instantly, telling detectives she recognized her grandson by the way he walked and the shape of his body, even before seeing his face clearly. DNA had been collected from the scene, along with a rape kit and fingernail evidence from Mitchell herself, all sent for forensic comparison. And a search warrant produced a DNA sample directly from Arnold to compare against everything recovered. By the time Jacavius Arnold appeared in a Fulton County courtroom for his preliminary hearing, prosecutors had laid out a case built on video, forensic evidence, and his own words. The question now wasn't whether he'd done it. It was what would happen to him next, and whether the full truth of what he'd done, in Atlanta and possibly beyond it, would ever be completely known. What makes this case particularly unsettling to investigators isn't just the crime itself. It's how ordinary the lead-up looked on camera. Nothing about the footage, watched in real time rather than with the benefit of hindsight, would have raised alarm. A man approaches a woman who appears to be having trouble finding her way. He offers help. She initially refuses, then accepts. They walk together. It's the kind of interaction that happens on city streets constantly, almost always without consequence. That's precisely what made it so dangerous. And it's a pattern true crime investigators see again and again in cases involving predatory strangers. The performance of helpfulness isn't incidental to these crimes. It's often the mechanism that makes them possible in the first place. Body camera footage from Arnold's arrest paints a portrait of a man who seemed to collapse the moment officers arrived. He didn't run. He didn't deny anything. Instead, according to the footage, he repeatedly told arresting officers he was a horrible person and that he needed to be taken into custody. Language that struck investigators less as genuine remorse and more as a man who had already accepted, somewhere in the back of his mind, that this day was always coming. That sense of inevitability only deepened once detectives sat down with him. Interrogation room confessions are rarely clean, linear accounts. They tend to arrive in fragments, revised and re-revised as a suspect tests how much the people across the table already know. Detective Shepard's courtroom testimony suggested Arnold's account followed that same pattern. An initial framing of himself as a good Samaritan, followed by an admission of violence once it became clear investigators already had him on camera, following her every step of the way. The revelation of 2 additional, previously unconnected assaults is the detail that transforms this from a single, isolated tragedy into something far more troubling for investigators. It raises the uncomfortable but necessary question that homicide detectives ask. In almost every case like this one, how many warning signs existed before the case that finally ended in a body being found? According to Shepard's testimony, both of the earlier incidents Arnold described shared a common blueprint. Approach a woman alone, offer assistance, then turn violent once she was isolated. If true, it meant Arnold had refined this pattern more than once before the night Mitchell Dung crossed his path, and that at least one prior victim was fortunate enough to escape when he wasn't. For investigators, cases like this tend to underscore a hard truth about predatory violence. It rarely begins with a single act. It escalates. And the interval between a first assault and a fatal one is often the only window in which intervention is even possible, which is exactly why DeKalb County's follow-up into those 2 unidentified women mattered as much as anything else uncovered in the Fulton County hearing. The DNA evidence, once it came back, would either corroborate every piece of Arnold's account or contradict it. Either way, prosecutors made clear at the hearing that they weren't relying on a confession alone. Confessions, however detailed, can be challenged, recanted, or reframed by a defense team long before a case reaches trial. What they wanted was physical evidence that stood on its own, independent of anything Arnold said in an interrogation room. Inside the Fulton County courtroom, the preliminary hearing for Jacavius Arnold laid bare just how much evidence investigators had assembled in less than a month. Detective Jerian Shepard walked the court through the surveillance footage timeline, confirming Arnold's movements from the Marta station to the parking garage where Mitchell Dung's body was later found. He testified that no surveillance footage and no crime scene details had been released to the public or the media before Arnold's arrest, which meant the specifics Arnold volunteered during questioning couldn't have come from anywhere except first-hand knowledge of the crime itself. The forensic picture, prosecutors explained, was still being assembled. A full autopsy report was expected to take up to 90 days, though the medical examiner had already indicated in preliminary conversations with detectives that the circumstances pointed clearly to foul play. A rape kit had been collected, along with fingernail clippings and touch DNA from the scene, all sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation for comparison against a DNA sample obtained from Arnold through a search warrant. Those results, prosecutors noted, could take considerably longer, since the GBI processes forensic evidence for the entire state. Detective Shepard also confirmed preliminary findings of bruising on Mitchell's body, consistent with a violent struggle, though a complete injury report would have to wait for the final autopsy. Perhaps the most chilling portion of the hearing concerned the two prior attacks Arnold had described during questioning. Assaults detectives hadn't connected to him before he volunteered the information himself. Shepard testified that DeKalb County investigators had been notified and had begun their own follow-up, but that as of the hearing, neither of the women from those earlier incidents had been identified. One attack, Shepard said, occurred in a wooded area near one of Arnold's own residences. In the other, the intended victim managed to fight back and escape. The implication, left largely unspoken in the courtroom but unmistakable to everyone in it, was that Mitchell Dung may not have been the only person Jacavius Arnold had ever hurt, and that if it hadn't been for his own confession, DeKalb County might never have known to look. Defense questioning focused on procedural details, how photographs had been shown to Arnold's grandmother, whether official identification documents had been used to confirm his identity, the exact chain of custody for DNA evidence. But none of it altered the fundamental weight of what had already been established. At the close of the hearing, the judge found probable cause on 9 separate charges, including murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, false imprisonment, aggravated sexual battery, necrophilia, financial transaction card theft, and robbery. Citing Georgia law, the judge denied bond entirely. Jacavius Arnold would remain in custody as the case moved forward. Court records show Arnold had prior arrests in Fulton County dating back to 2016 and 2017 for property crimes and a robbery-related charge.
I did hear probable cause to support the following 9 charges: murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, aggravated sexual battery, necrophilia, financial transaction card theft, robbery, and kidnapping. Pursuant to OCGA 17-6-1, I'll enter an order for no bond at this time. And that is the order of the court. Court is adjourned.
But Mitchell's loved ones had one last thing to say before he was taken away.
Brief stays behind bars, followed each time by release on bond. Nothing in that record had suggested the kind of violence detectives said he was capable of. It's a detail that haunts cases like this one, the quiet gap between a criminal record and the crime that finally reveals who someone really is. The case moved slowly through the courts, as cases like this often do. Forensic timelines, pretrial motions, the machinery of a justice system built for thoroughness rather than speed. But in March of 2026, more than 2.5 years after Mitchell Deng disappeared on her way home from a concert, Jacavius Arnold was sentenced. Court records confirm a sentence of life in prison for murder and kidnapping, to be served within the Georgia Department of Corrections. For Mitchell Deng's family, the sentence closed one chapter of an ordeal that began the moment she stopped answering her phone. It will never undo what happened in that stairwell. And it can't answer every question that still lingers about the other women Arnold may have hurt before her. But it does mean that a parking garage attendant's decision not to walk away from a smell he couldn't explain, and the month of patient, methodical work that followed, ultimately gave Mitchell Dung's family something they never should have had to fight for: the truth and a measure of justice. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with cases like this one. Grief that never fully resolves, because so much of it is tangled up in questions that no sentencing hearing can answer. Why her? Why that night? Whether it could have been prevented if the 2 earlier attacks Arnold described had been reported, connected, investigated sooner. Those aren't questions a courtroom is built to answer. They're the questions that linger with a family long after the cameras leave and the case file closes. What the case does offer, though, is a kind of vindication for the instincts that too often get dismissed. A family that refused to wait quietly when a daughter stopped answering her phone. A parking garage attendant who could have walked past a bad smell and told himself it wasn't his problem. A grandmother who looked at a blurry piece of surveillance video and said, without hesitation, that she recognized her own grandson by nothing more than the way he carried himself. Every one of those moments could have gone differently. Every one of them instead became a thread that investigators pulled until the whole picture came into view. It's worth remembering, too, that cases like this rarely end as cleanly as a single sentencing hearing suggests. The 2 women from the earlier DeKalb County incidents, the ones Arnold volunteered information about entirely on his own, remain, as of the preliminary hearing, unidentified. Somewhere, there may be women who survived an encounter with Jacavius Arnold and never knew his name, never reported what happened, or reported it to a system that, at the time, had nothing to connect it to. If either of those women ever comes forward or is ever identified through DeKalb County's ongoing follow-up, it will only add to a case that was never really about one night in a stairwell. It was about a pattern that took entirely too long to catch up with the person creating it. Mitchell Dung went out to see a concert with friends. That's the whole of what she did wrong, if wrongdoing is even the right word for accepting help from someone who offered it convincingly enough. Her name and the persistence of the people who loved her are the reason Jacavius Arnold will spend the rest of his life in a Georgia prison instead of walking free to do this again. That's the case. That's the story. And it's exactly the kind of quiet, procedural, unglamorous police work. Footage cross-referenced, evidence painstakingly matched, a family that refused to stop asking questions, that actually solves cases like this one, far more often than any dramatic breakthrough ever does. It's also worth sitting for a moment with the timeline itself. 4 days between Mitchell's disappearance and the discovery of her body. Roughly a month between that discovery and an arrest. 2.5 years between that arrest and a final sentence. For a family living through all 3 phases, the pacing rarely feels appropriate. And yet, by the time it was over, Atlanta investigators had built a case detailed enough to produce 9 separate probable cause findings and a life sentence with no possibility of bond. Cases like Mitchell Dung's tend to stay with the detectives who work them long after sentencing. Not just because of what was done to her, but because of how close the truth came to staying buried. It didn't stay buried this time. A family asked questions. An attendant followed a smell he couldn't explain. A detective followed a stumble on a piece of video no one else thought to look twice at. And because of all of it, Jacavius Arnold will spend the rest of his life exactly where he belongs.